For 3,000 years, peace had reigned across the galaxy. The United Galactic Council, formed by dozens of species, had worked tirelessly to maintain order and cooperation among the stars. Humanity, once a fledgling species, had grown stronger and more prosperous with each passing century, but always with an understanding that peace was fragile. The galaxy had its fair share of conflicts, but the humans had chosen to tread carefully, choosing diplomacy over force. The humans, unlike many other species, had learned early on that survival didn't just depend on strength, but on wisdom and timing. Over time, humanity had earned the respect of the Council, and while they weren't the biggest or the oldest race, they were seen as one of the most reliable. But peace has a strange way of unraveling. Just when the galaxy seemed to settle into a quiet, predictable existence, the unthinkable happened. The Varkanians, a once great alien race known for their ruthless conquests and warlike nature, suddenly declared war on humanity. This announcement was made from their heavily fortified warships, their voices booming across every communications channel. It was a chilling moment for the galaxy. The Varkanians had long been silent, their empire's expansion having stalled centuries ago, but now they were back, and they were targeting Earth. The Varkanians were not just any race. They were known for their monstrous strength, their advanced weaponry, and their ability to crush anything in their path. They had once ruled vast territories, their fleets feared throughout the galaxy. But now, their motives were unclear. Why would a race so powerful, so accustomed to dominating others, suddenly turn on humanity, a species they had long dismissed as weak and insignificant? The galaxy was filled with questions, but the Varkanians made their intentions clear. This wasn't a random act of aggression. This was a calculated move. On Earth, President Evelyn Sado watched the broadcast with an expression of disbelief. Her advisors, stunned by the news, whispered amongst themselves, unsure of how to react. The humans had not fought a major war in centuries, and to be thrust into such a situation, without warning, was a shock. President Sado understood that this wasn't just an attack on Earth, it was an attack on everything humanity had worked for. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's rise from the ashes of their past, and now they were being threatened by an ancient enemy. But Evelyn Sado was not one to panic. In the face of adversity, she remained calm, her mind already working through strategies. The Varkanians had underestimated humanity for centuries, and she was determined to make them realize their mistake. She had always believed that strength didn't lie solely in weapons or ships. It was in the resolve of a species to stand its ground, no matter the odds. She knew that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt and innovate. As the broadcast ended, Sado turned to her team, her face grim but resolute. "Prepare our response," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We're not going to cower. We're going to fight back." Her words echoed in the room, and though some of her advisors exchanged uncertain glances, they knew better than to question her. There was something about her presence, her confidence, that inspired trust in even the most uncertain moments. Across the galaxy, the Varkanians awaited humanity's response, certain that the humans would cower in fear, as they had expected. The Varkanians had assumed that their declaration would send shockwaves through Earth, forcing them to surrender or beg for mercy. Instead, what the Varkanians received was a response that left them momentarily stunned. Humanity did not plead. Humanity did not tremble. Instead, President Sado's message was short but powerful. "We accept your challenge, Varkanians, but be warned, we don't fight like you." It was a simple statement, yet it resonated across the stars. The Varkanians were taken aback. They had expected the humans to crumble under the weight of their threat, to beg for peace as they had done in the past. Instead, they were met with defiance, something the Varkanians were unaccustomed to. To them, the idea of humanity responding with such confidence was laughable. They had always seen humans as unpredictable, but they had never considered the possibility that they could be underestimated by such a young and seemingly fragile species. The Varkanians, with their advanced technologies and brutal history, were certain that no one, especially humans, could match them in battle. But President Seto understood something the Varkanians didn't. Humans had not simply been living in peace for the last 3,000 years. They had been preparing. Humanity had spent the last few centuries studying their enemies, learning their weaknesses, and perfecting their strategies. While other species had grown complacent in their peace, humanity had quietly advanced, perfecting their technologies, refining their tactics, and preparing for the day when they would be called upon to defend their right to exist in the galaxy. The galaxy watched in silence, uncertain of what would happen next. On one hand, there was the Varkanian war machine, massive and unstoppable. On the other, there was Earth, a seemingly defenseless planet that had never known the horrors of war on a galactic scale. It was a fight that seemed inevitable. The Varkanians believed they had the upper hand, that the humans would buckle under the weight of their declaration. Yet there was a nagging feeling among some of the older races in the galaxy, an unease that suggested that this wouldn't be as simple as the Varkanians believed. And then, the first wave of Varkanian ships arrived in Earth's orbit. The Varkanians unleashed their advanced weaponry in a display of sheer firepower, demonstrating the terrifying capabilities of their fleet. They launched their first strike without hesitation, expecting humanity to flinch. But as the Varkanians watched through their viewing screens, something unexpected happened. Humans did not retreat. They did not panic. In fact, their response was nothing short of surprising. Instead of retreating into defense, the humans began to organize. In a matter of hours, the first human countermeasures were in place. The first ships were launched, not as full-scale military vessels, but as specialized crafts designed to counteract the Varkanians' superior firepower. Humanity had a different approach. They didn't believe in matching strength with strength. Instead, they believed in outsmarting their opponents, striking when and where it would hurt the most. The first skirmishes were small, but they sent a message that humanity was not going to go down quietly. The Varkanians might have thought they were facing an easy target, but they were in for a rude awakening. For the first time in centuries, humanity was forced to defend its existence. But as the Varkanians prepared to press their advantage, they were unaware of what they were truly facing. They were about to find out that underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. The galaxy watched with wide eyes as the first human countermeasures against the Varkanian invasion unfolded. The Varkanians, having expected a quick and decisive victory, were baffled by the resilience humanity displayed. The Varkanian fleet, vast and powerful, had arrived with the expectation that Earth's defenses would crumble under the weight of their advanced weaponry. But instead of the terror they had anticipated, they found humanity's response to be strangely composed. It wasn't just the humans' courage that surprised them. It was their ingenuity. The human fleet had not been designed for brute force. Rather, it was built with subtlety and adaptability in mind, traits that had made humanity the dominant force in the galaxy. Where other species relied on sheer strength, humans relied on their ability to think differently. They didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. In the first days of the conflict, it became clear that the Varkanians had underestimated the humans. While the Varkanians' massive warships fired powerful blasts at Earth's defenses, they were met with unexpected resistance. The human military, having anticipated the Varkanian strengths, had equipped their ships with a new kind of technology, holographic decoys. These decoys were so advanced that they fooled the Varkanian targeting systems, making it impossible for the invaders to land a single direct hit. Every time the Varkanians thought they had hit their target, they realized they had struck a mere illusion. The Varkanians could not understand how the humans had created such an advanced technology in such a short time. To them, it seemed impossible. But the humans had spent the past 3 millennia preparing for this moment, and their understanding of technology had far surpassed what anyone could have predicted. While the Varkanians struggled with their failed attacks, the humans were busy regrouping. They didn't have the luxury of a massive fleet to match the Varkanian size. What they did have, however, was something much more valuable: creativity. The human fleet was made up of smaller, more agile ships that moved quickly and efficiently. Their tactic wasn't to face the Varkanians head-on, but to strike from unexpected angles, attacking the invaders' weak spots. The humans knew that the Varkanians, with their superior firepower and large ships, had one significant flaw: they were predictable. They relied too much on brute force and ignored the importance of adaptability. Humanity, on the other hand, had learned the value of flexibility. The first successful strike against the Varkanians wasn't a massive blow. It was a subtle act of sabotage. A human ship, disguised as a Varkanian scout, infiltrated the alien fleet's outer defenses and planted a virus into their communications network. Within hours, the Varkanians were struggling to communicate with one another, their ships unable to relay commands or follow orders. The virus had crippled their coordination, turning their fleet into a chaotic mess. This was the moment when the true nature of human warfare began to shine. Humans didn't just fight battles, they fought battles within battles. While the Varkanians focused on overwhelming their opponents with sheer strength, the humans targeted their weaknesses with precision. They had learned long ago that every enemy had a flaw, no matter how powerful they seemed. The Varkanians had failed to account for this. They had assumed that their size and firepower would guarantee victory, but they had overlooked one important detail. Humans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with their minds. As the days passed, the Varkanians grew more frustrated. They had expected humanity to be a quick and easy conquest, but now they were finding themselves locked in a battle of wits. The human fleet was quick, striking with deadly accuracy and retreating before the Varkanians could retaliate. What the Varkanians had once viewed as a weak species was now proving to be their greatest challenge, and the more they fought, the more they realized how unprepared they were. Every strategy they tried to implement was met with a countermeasure they hadn't anticipated. The humans were always one step ahead, always anticipating their next move. The Varkanians, now desperate, began to escalate their attacks. They sent larger, more powerful ships to Earth's orbit, hoping to overwhelm the humans with their numbers. But instead of fear, the humans responded with something entirely unexpected: a smirk. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. President Sado, watching the Varkanian ships gather for their next strike, couldn't help but smile. She knew something the Varkanians didn't. Humanity had prepared for this moment. The humans had not only studied the Varkanians' weapons, they had studied their culture, their history, and their psychology. They understood that when cornered, the Varkanians would resort to their most extreme tactics. But they also knew that this desperation would lead to their downfall. As the Varkanians launched their most massive attack yet, the humans responded with a series of coordinated counterattacks that caught the invaders completely off guard. Instead of engaging in a traditional space battle, the humans used the terrain of space itself to their advantage. They lured the Varkanians into a nearby asteroid field, a natural labyrinth of rock and debris. The Varkanians, with their immense firepower, struggled to maneuver through the field, their ships too large and cumbersome for the tight spaces. Meanwhile, the smaller human ships weaved through the field with ease, launching surprise attacks from multiple directions. The Varkanians had no idea how to respond. The battle turned into a game of cat and mouse, with the humans always staying one step ahead. In the heat of the conflict, the Varkanians began to lose their grip on their strategy. They had thought that overwhelming force would win the war, but they were finding that humans didn't fight to match strength. They fought to outsmart their enemies. The more the Varkanians pushed, the more they were forced to retreat. And as their ships were destroyed, piece by piece, they realized something they had never considered. Humanity's strength wasn't in their weapons, but in their minds. With every loss, the Varkanians grew more disoriented, and the humans grew more confident. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Varkanians had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that their superiority in size and firepower would guarantee victory. But the humans had proven that intelligence, adaptability, and strategy were just as powerful as any weapon. The galaxy was watching as humanity, once thought to be a weak and insignificant species, turned the tide of war with nothing more than their wits. The Varkanians had underestimated humanity, and as each day passed, they were learning that the human advantage wasn't something that could be defeated with sheer force. It was something that had been cultivated over centuries, a deep understanding that the mind was just as important a weapon as any laser cannon. And as the Varkanians began to realize the truth, they were forced to reckon with one undeniable fact. Humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. The galaxy watched as the human forces prepared for what would become their first major battle against the Varkanians. The Varkanians, having failed to crush the humans with their initial attacks, were now eager to bring an end to this surprise resistance. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were determined to show that their vast fleet and firepower could never be matched. However, the humans weren't as helpless as the Varkanians had believed. They had been preparing for this moment for years, knowing that the day would come when their small fleet would face the full force of the alien invaders. The humans weren't foolish enough to think they could win a direct confrontation with the massive Varkanian fleet. They didn't have the numbers, the sheer size, or the advanced weaponry to match their enemy's power. But they had something far more dangerous: a plan. President Sato, leading the human forces, understood the importance of strategy and patience. The Varkanians were aggressive, predictable, and proud. They believed that nothing could stand in their way. This belief would be their downfall. The first major battle began when the Varkanian fleet arrived at the outskirts of Earth's outer defenses. The humans, though vastly outnumbered, did not flinch. They had laid the groundwork for this battle long before the first Varkanian ships appeared in the sky. President Sato had ordered her forces to be ready to fight in the most unconventional way possible. The Varkanians expected a full-scale assault, but what they didn't expect was for the humans to vanish from their radar completely. At the moment, the Varkanian fleet moved into position. The human forces struck. But instead of launching a traditional attack, the humans executed a surprise tactic that took the Varkanians completely off guard. Using newly developed cloaking technology, the human ships disappeared from the Varkanian scanners. The Varkanians, unable to detect the humans' presence, began to wonder if they had made a mistake. Were the humans already gone, or was something more dangerous waiting for them in the shadows? The first strike was quick and precise. Human ships, hidden in the depths of the asteroid field near Earth's orbit, emerged from their cloaking devices and launched a barrage of missiles. Varkanians were caught completely unprepared, their ships taking heavy damage before they even had a chance to retaliate. The human missiles were equipped with EMP charges that disabled the Varkanian shields, rendering them vulnerable to further attacks. But the humans didn't stop there. With their technology, they could see the Varkanian ships in real time, using advanced sensors that tracked even the slightest movement. They quickly found weak points in the Varkanian ships and aimed their next wave of attacks there, ensuring maximum damage. The Varkanians scrambled to regroup, but their confusion was evident. They had expected an overwhelming force, a direct assault that would crush any resistance. Instead, they were being picked off one by ships they couldn't even see. The human forces, despite their small numbers, were proving to be a deadly force. The humans were agile, quick, and unpredictable, striking when and where the Varkanians least expected it. As the battle wore on, the Varkanians grew more and more desperate. Their once proud fleet was now in disarray, with ships scattering in every direction. The humans, however, remained calm and focused. They didn't need to win a single battle. They just needed to outsmart the Varkanians, to make them doubt their superiority. And that's exactly what they did. The battle wasn't just about firepower. It was about intelligence and precision. The humans used their superior knowledge of space navigation to their advantage, positioning their ships in ways that made it impossible for the Varkanians to anticipate. The human fleet was a ghost, always shifting, always out of reach. And the Varkanians, no matter how hard they tried, couldn't catch them. During the height of the battle, the Varkanians attempted to launch a counterattack, sending their largest ships into the fray. These ships were armed with powerful weaponry capable of destroying anything in their path. But the humans, ever resourceful, had anticipated this move. Using advanced hacking techniques, the human fleet infiltrated the Varkanian ship systems and caused a massive malfunction. The Varkanians, who had relied so heavily on their technology, found themselves at the mercy of the humans. The large Varkanian ships, once considered invincible, began to malfunction, their weapons misfiring, and their navigation systems going haywire. It was chaos. The humans didn't waste the opportunity. They moved in swiftly, targeting the vulnerable Varkanian ships with precision strikes. The damage to the Varkanian fleet was significant, and with every passing minute, their chances of victory grew slimmer. The Varkanians had been arrogant, thinking that their advanced technology would win them the war. But they hadn't counted on humanity's greatest weapon, their ability to adapt. President Sato, watching from the command center aboard her flagship, remained calm. The battle was far from over, but humanity had already dealt a devastating blow to the Varkanians. The invaders, once confident in their superiority, were now scrambling to regain control. It was clear that this battle would be a turning point in the war. However, even in their desperation, the Varkanians were not willing to surrender. They fought back with everything they had left, launching a final wave of attacks against the human fleet. The humans, though worn from hours of combat, held their ground. The battle was no longer just about defeating the Varkanians. It was about proving that humanity could not be defeated. In a final act of defiance, the Varkanians sent a fleet of suicide bombers toward Earth's outer defenses, hoping to deal a devastating blow to the humans' planet. But the humans were ready. With incredible coordination, they intercepted the bombers before they could reach their target. The Varkanian fleet, now severely weakened, began to retreat. The battle was won. The first major battle had ended in victory for humanity. It was a victory that would go down in history as a testament to humanity's ingenuity and determination. The Varkanians, despite their advanced technology and massive fleet, had been outsmarted and outmaneuvered by a species they had once considered weak. As the human fleet watched the retreating Varkanian ships disappear into the distance, President Sato couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The humans had not only survived, they had proved that their greatest strength was not in their weapons, but in their minds. The Varkanians had underestimated them, and now they were learning the hard way that humanity was not a species to be taken lightly. The war was far from over, but the humans had taken the first step toward victory. They had shown the galaxy that no matter how powerful an enemy might seem, there was always a way to defeat them. The Varkanians had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity, and now they would have to face the consequences. The Varkanians had underestimated humanity in ways they would come to regret. After the unexpected defeat of their fleet in the first major battle, the Varkanians were no longer confident in their supposed superiority. Despite their technology and advanced weaponry, they had been outsmarted by a species they had considered weak and unworthy of serious consideration. Yet, even in their retreat, they were determined to return stronger than ever. For the Varkanians, there was no surrender. This war would continue until their dominance over humanity was established. But for the humans, the victory had been a reminder of what they were capable of when pushed to their limits. President Sato knew that this was their turning point, the moment when humanity could either fall into complacency or take the next step toward securing their future. It was no longer about just surviving. It was about winning, about proving to the galaxy that they were not the underdogs. The Varkanians had underestimated them once, but they would not make that mistake again. Now, humanity would make sure the Varkanians knew exactly what they were up against. The human fleet was preparing for the next phase of the war. Sato and her advisors worked tirelessly, analyzing every move the Varkanians might make, every possibility. They knew that a direct confrontation would not guarantee victory. so they needed to outsmart their enemies again. The humans had something the Varkanians didn't, a deep understanding of their enemies' behavior. The Varkanians, for all their power, were predictable. They relied too heavily on their advanced technology, and their arrogance blinded them to the ingenuity of those they sought to conquer. A few weeks after the first battle, the Varkanians launched their counteroffensive. They had regrouped, repaired their damaged ships, and were now more determined than ever to crush the human forces. This time, however, they had a new weapon, a massive dreadnought, the most powerful ship in their fleet, capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast. With this new weapon, they believed they could overwhelm the humans and put an end to their resistance once and for all. But what the Varkanians didn't know was that President Sato had been anticipating this exact move. The humans had been working on a countermeasure for months, knowing that the Varkanians would eventually deploy such a weapon. The humans' new secret weapon wasn't as flashy or as powerful as the Varkanian dreadnought, but it was something the Varkanians would never have expected. It was a single ship, small and unassuming, but equipped with a technology that would render the dreadnought's firepower useless. The moment the Varkanian fleet entered human space, the trap was set into motion. The humans lured the Varkanians toward the outskirts of the solar system, where the terrain was unfamiliar and difficult to navigate. The humans had scattered their ships in the asteroid belt, using the dense field of rocks and debris to hide their movements. The Varkanians, eager to strike, moved in without caution, expecting an easy victory. But the humans were ready. The small, seemingly insignificant ship, codenamed Phantom, emerged from the shadows, its cloaking technology making it almost invisible to Varkanian sensors. As the Varkanian dreadnought closed in on Earth's defenses, the Phantom moved into position behind it. The Varkanians had no idea that their greatest weapon was about to be neutralized. With a single, well-timed strike, the Phantom fired a specialized pulse directly into the Varkanian dreadnought's core. The pulse wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. It didn't destroy the ship. Instead, it sent a powerful electromagnetic wave through the dreadnought's systems, completely disabling its shields and rendering it helpless. The once mighty vessel, designed to take down entire fleets, was now powerless, adrift in space. The Varkanians, caught off guard, tried desperately to recover, but it was too late. The humans had already launched a series of coordinated attacks, targeting the vulnerable areas of the disabled dreadnought. Their small, agile ships darted in and out of the asteroid field, using the terrain to stay hidden, while they delivered precision strikes. The Varkanians, now unable to rely on their superior firepower, were forced into a defensive position, struggling to adapt to the humans' unpredictable tactics. Meanwhile, the rest of the human fleet moved in from various points across the solar system, ensuring that the Varkanians were completely surrounded. The Varkanian ships, though still powerful, were no match for the human speed and adaptability. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the humans were gaining the upper hand. For every ship the Varkanians destroyed, 2 more human ships took its place. It was a war of attrition, and the humans were outlasting their enemies. As the Varkanians began to retreat once more, President Sato felt a sense of triumph. This battle wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point in the war. The humans had proven that they could defeat the Varkanians not through brute strength, but through strategy, innovation, and resilience. They had faced their greatest challenge yet and had emerged victorious. The Varkanians had been forced to retreat, but they weren't about to give up. The war was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like humanity had the upper hand. Sato gathered her advisors in the war room as the last of the Varkanian ships retreated from the battlefield. She knew that this victory would not be enough to end the war, but it would send a clear message to the Varkanians. The humans were not to be underestimated. They were a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was no longer on the back foot. They had the advantage now. As the humans celebrated their victory, there was no time for complacency. The Varkanians would return, stronger and more determined than ever. But humanity was ready. They had learned from their enemies, adapted, and were now prepared for whatever came next. This was the turning point, the moment when humanity shifted from being the underdog to becoming the unstoppable force that would shape the future of the galaxy. President Seto looked out at the stars, knowing that the war was far from over. But now, for the first time, she could see a glimmer of hope. Humanity had proven its worth, and they would continue to fight, not just for their survival, but for the future they knew they could build. After years of brutal conflict, after all the battles, defeats, and triumphs, humanity had proven something that the Varkanians could not ignore. They were a force unlike any other the galaxy had ever seen. The war had escalated into a true struggle for survival, with each side taking heavy losses. But now, as the final confrontation loomed, the tide had shifted irrevocably in humanity's favor. The Varkanians, once so certain of their superiority, had become hesitant, their confidence crumbling with every defeat. They had never expected humanity to be so relentless, so clever, or so willing to sacrifice everything for their future. In the heart of the human fleet, President Seto stood in the war room, her gaze fixed on the star charts before her. The Varkanians had gathered their remaining forces, and this time they were prepared for the final assault. Their new flagship, a colossal battleship named the Varkner, was on a direct course to Earth. It was an engineering marvel, brimming with advanced weaponry, capable of wiping entire cities off the planet in a single strike. For the Varkanians, this would be the decisive blow, a final, crushing blow to end humanity's resistance once and for all. But Seto knew that this was not the end. It couldn't be. The human spirit, the will to survive, had proven time and time again to be stronger than any weapon or strategy the Varkanians could throw at them. She had watched as her fleet had outsmarted the Varkanians at every turn, forcing them into retreat after retreat. Now, it was time to finish what had been started. The human fleet had already begun moving into position. This would be their greatest gamble yet, but they had no other choice. The Varkner was coming, and with it, the last hope of the Varkanians to end the war on their terms. But humanity had one final trick to play. A single, well-executed strike could turn the tide of this final battle. The question was, could they pull it off before the Varkner reached Earth? In the command center, Seto spoke calmly to her officers. "We've faced impossible odds before. This is no different. Trust in the strategy, trust in the fleet. This is the final Smirk, the moment we show the Varkanians that we are not just survivors, we are the future." Her words resonated with every officer in the room. They had been through so much together, each of them a part of something larger than themselves. Now they were ready to make their final stand. With a mix of nervous anticipation and quiet resolve, the fleet moved into position, the last line of defense between Earth and the Varkanian war machine. As the Varkanians approached, Seto watched the massive warship on her screen, growing larger by the second. She could almost hear the hum of the Varkner's engines, the vibrations that would soon be felt across the entire human fleet. But as the human ships closed in on their positions, something unexpected happened. The Varkanians halted. The Varkner slowed, as though it had sensed something. A ripple of confusion spread across the Varkanian fleet, a hesitation that had not been seen before. The humans had set a trap. Seto had known that the Varkanians, for all their strength, had one critical flaw: their overconfidence. The Varkner had been built with the belief that nothing could touch it, nothing could challenge its power. The Varkanians had become so accustomed to victory that they had overlooked a key element of human strategy: adaptability. The human fleet had drawn the Varkanians into the perfect position. The asteroid fields near Earth, once thought to be nothing more than a hindrance, now became a perfect battlefield. A fleet of smaller human ships, including the Phantom, the vessel that had turned the tide in the earlier battles, slipped into the asteroid belt, invisible to the Varkanian sensors. They waited patiently until the moment was right. And then they struck. The initial attack came in a series of swift, coordinated strikes. The smaller human ships darted from behind the asteroids, targeting weak points in the Varkners' defenses. The Varkanians scrambled to react, their massive warship shifting its position, trying to bring its superior weapons to bear. But it was too late. The Phantom's advanced technology, once again, disabled the ship's primary shields. The Varkner was left exposed, vulnerable. The Varkanians could do nothing but watch in stunned silence as the human fleet moved in, their weapons launching in synchronized precision. For the first time in the entire war, the Varkanians were on the defensive. Their flagship, the pride of their fleet, was being torn apart by human ingenuity and determination. It was a sight that no one had ever thought possible. A species that had once been on the verge of extinction now stood on the brink of total victory over an empire that had dominated for centuries. As the battle raged on, Seto's thoughts turned to the future. She had never doubted humanity's potential, but even she had not expected such a decisive victory. The Varkner was destroyed, and with it, the heart of the Varkanian fleet. The remaining Varkanian ships, disorganized and in disarray, were easy targets for the remaining human forces. The once proud alien empire was crumbling before their eyes, unable to keep up with the relentless pace of humanity's advance. Back on Earth, the people watched in awe as the human fleet delivered blow after blow to the retreating Varkanians. The news spread like wildfire. Humanity had won. They had faced an enemy unlike any they had ever known, and not only had they survived, but they had triumphed. The Varkanians, for all their might, had underestimated the power of human resilience, creativity, and unity. As the final Varkanian ship was destroyed, Sato allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had watched her people rise from the ashes of uncertainty, and now they stood victorious. But there was no time for celebration yet. The war was over, but the consequences would last for generations. The Varkanians would not forget this defeat, and neither would the rest of the galaxy.